There we are. And then we click pin here. Okay. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to fractalu.com, fractalfield.com. As you know, I'm Dan Winter, and I'm here with Tufan Guven, our co-host. Can wave hi, Tufan. That's good. And we have a few announcements tonight. So the major event tonight is a somewhat visual series of presentations on the art of implosion, the imploder.com, imploder in water, implosion in vortex, how vortex mechanics works. But we're also going to have a sweet little intro and preview about the science of eclipses in honor of next week's famous solar eclipse. But before we do that, Tufan, shall we just do our brief announcements here?
Sure. Next week, we are going to have a lecture with you about pyramid wireless power, which you'll be giving some intro, I guess. And also the piezo fire shippings are going on program, all good. And we have developments about the conference in September, all going nice. And I think that's all.
Yeah, so the piezofire.com in some ways is a victim of its own success. We're still at almost 2 to 3 weeks out because of demand, but we're producing them diligently and shipping them, and people are having wonderful experiences. We have a new report coming up on piezofire.com about how Emmanuel really had a major solution after hospital scans with his problem with his shoulder that he fell on. And he really had a tremendously serious experience of solution after the scan that he was quite convinced it was the piezo that helped him dramatically, which is wonderful. Not just pain reduction, but actually regenerative in the sense of centripetal. So piezofire.com is a bang-up success in many ways, a kind of mini Therify, and we're very happy about it. And yes, regarding the conference, so fractalfield.com/2024, our fourth international conference on science and consciousness here in South France, September 19. And believe it or not, of the 41 rooms, more than half the rooms are already booked. It's amazing. The interest is intense and wonderful, and we're going to have serious fun. So you are invited. Come and play. Okay, so tonight's little fun story. Actually, I was just having a chat with Jenny there. Jenny, wave hi. So Jenny is leading our Lucid Dream Team group. And Jenny, do you want to repeat what you just said about dreaming in the presence of an eclipse?
Yes. So do you want to give a bit of context first? Because I haven't seen the clip. Is it something on from Gaia? Is it who was?
Yes. Okay. Well, the context was, one context. Obviously, the major eclipse due here is April 8. It's a practically total eclipse of the sun over a major path over the USA. And for example, Sasha Stone just had a major series of interviews with indigenous people warning how important and serious this was. And during the eclipse, the indigenous peoples who are famous for their lucid dreaming are saying, it is important that you be holding space during the eclipse. What does that mean? Question mark. And you were saying before about the need to be quite aware, even that although you can project yourself perhaps more easily, there is the issue of keeping coherence because of otherwise there is the issue of parasites, for example.
Yes. So I think we were talking about the waxing and waning, weren't we, of the moon?
Yes.
And we know that how deeply it affects our physical bodies, all of our energetic bodies. And there's also the perturbance of the wider grid, the Berkman currents, the planetary grid, and also I have to say, adverse forces who also use those times, the peaks and the troughs, to perform, not non-generative things. Let's say that. So what we find in the pod is that we are usually called to enter the long wave, usually at a planetary level during these times, in order to hold space and also to create a coherent long wave that then goes around the planet. And interestingly, we've just recently invited someone in from African continent, and we have found it makes a huge difference to do, there is now a whole great circle, as Patrick would like to call them. We do a whole circuit so that when we come together and move into the longitudinal array, that it creates a very deep, we tune into the very deep rhythm of the planet, the oceans, that's another ocean, the oceanscape. And then we are usually taken to places where the grid needs some repairs, where there may be hungry ghosts, where reconstruction work needs to happen.
Yes, fix the grid.
Yes, and we dream together. We are starting to dream together when we get there. So we feed back to each other about how we're feeling, what the impressions that are coming in. It is very dynamically creative becoming. And we had a recent voyage where were literally circling the planet over and over on a very long wave, at a very deep level. And obviously it's beautiful. Now, and we were also, Dan, talking about that it's okay to do that, because we are coherent, we work coherently as a pod. However, it's not the kind of activity that I would suggest that people do by themselves, because it can be very erratic. You need to have a very, very strong visual sense of, the path integration, like keeping track of where your body is in the densities. And that's also why successfully dreaming in a pod is a very secure and safe thing, because we are literally all keeping an eye on each other, and we are constantly feeding back, constant biofeedback going on, and we are navigating very well. I'm really looking forward to the talk that on April the 14th.
Yes.
And so we'll also get some feedback from other pod members as well. So does that answer your question?
No, thank you, Jenny. That's obviously beautiful. And I admire this skill so much, to be able to lucid dream as a pod, and Jenny's courage in leading that group. And yes, it's perfectly beautiful that Jenny is describing that, being affected also by the stages of the moon. Now, tonight's conversation is about vortex implosion, and what does this have to do with the eclipse? Actually, I'm going to suggest here that it has everything to do with that, because obviously the path of, well, what I would call longitudinal coherence, but it also involves ions, etc., of the magnetic flux from the sun to the Earth is obviously a vortex. And when the moon obstructs the path of charge between the sun and the Earth, called an eclipse, the effect on biology is profound, obviously, as the indigenous people are warning us. And I am suggesting, even to Sasha and friends, that a much more powerful, much more penetrating level of science is useful to understand the actual wave mechanics here, and profoundly instructive to our next subject, which is vortex implosion. So here's a magnetic vortex from the sun, and when the moon is in the way, question mark. So I'd like to tell just a couple of quick stories about that. One is the very old story, as you know, that we believe that is the longitudinal or compressional component of the solar magnetics, which obviously is most bioactive. Classic story is that, as I've told this many times, you put a sheet of copper on your roof and a wire to a sheet of copper in the basement, and now the basement is pitch black, no light. But if the sun is hitting that sheet of copper on the roof, the plants grow perfectly well in that basement, because the longitudinal component of the solar magnetic is conveyed from the roof to the pitch black basement, and that's what makes the plants grow. Piece of evidence number one. That is the longitudinal component of the sun that is bioactive, obviously, because the reason, and I say again, the reason the seed germinates is because of symmetric implosive compression, which only the longitudinal component can do because it does the squeezing well. The transverse wave, no, no, no. You do not get implosive symmetric squeezing from transverse EMF. No, it is the longitudinal component, which, as Bearden said, is the stuff gravity waves are made of. Second example.
And then before you go to the second example, is this similar to what electroculture is, the science behind?
Well, see, so we're getting there. So if the geometry of the antenna, often copper, often a spiral, in electroculture is better at prehending the longitudinal component. For example, an RF engineer that wants to do what he calls circularly polarized, what we really know is longitudinal RF antenna, that antenna will be a spiral, actually, can be a spiral on a plane or a spiral on a cone, because that is better for prehending or picking up or being the antenna for the longitudinal component of the electromagnetic field. So yes, absolutely, thank you for bringing that up, that electroculture could benefit greatly from understanding what kind of antenna is most prehensive, most able to pick up longitudinal EMF component, which a study of longitudinal radio antenna would be very instructive. So, good point. The next example I was going to refer to here, you know, all these, there's hundreds of actually biologic studies and, of course, thousands of books about planting your seeds by the stages of the moon. So basically, they say that when the moon is waxing, your seed's going to grow better, and if it's waning, no. Well, has anybody ever given you the physics of why, if you want your seed to grow, you need to avoid the moon? Has anybody ever told you that? Maybe we need to know the principle behind it. Obviously, it works. For thousands of years, people have known the stage of the moon has everything to do with whether the seed grows. Has anybody explained the principle to you? Well, let's explain it right now. So actually, since it is the longitudinal and centripetal component of the sun that enables the squeezing implosively called seed germination, if something gets in the way of the longitudinal component of the sun and prevents the penetration, so it's actually, remember, history of the moon here. The moon was installed at the time of the Lesser Dryad, because when the Federation had to shoot the hell out of the Draco Anunnaki remnant, basically kicking Enki out of Atlantis in an attack designed by Enlil and his Draco family. Well, you know, that's the context here. It doesn't even matter if you believe the story. I think the story is very well said, and Elena and many others have articulated that story very well. But so then the Andromedans, which is their habit, took a hollowed out planetoid, which they have been doing for millions of years, filled with metal, and towed it in here to stabilize the planetary orbital. And we know very well our planetary orbital would be going shot all to hell if the moon wasn't there. In fact, we'd be toast without that moon stabilizing our orbit. And they knew that after they melted down half the damn solar system trying to shoot the Dracos out of here. And Tiamat flood, that's what the deluge was. Anyway, that's the background. The physics is the hollow metal artificial moon is the opposite to a good dielectric. That means that the longitudinal wave of the sun gets scrambled when it goes through the moon, man. I mean, talk about dead. Yeah, when the NASA landed on the craft on the moon and they thought they'd pick up a little bit of the seismic resonance, and instead the moon rang like a bell for days. Oh yeah, it's hollow and metal, that's for damn sure. Well, being hollow and metal ain't good for a dielectric that can pass like a lens the capacitance of the sun, meaning the life force, which is the longitudinal squeezing of the sun's resonance, is radically obstructed when the moon gets in the way. So now I would like to, as a scientist, display another little chart here. This is hopefully in the context of geobiology. We're looking at goldenmean.info/geobiology and the work of our long-term partner, Stefan Cardinot. He's showing the telluric chimney and the magnetic geometries which is the plasma life of the sacred cathedrals, etc. But the part that's relevant to this conversation is here on the left, showing what happened to the magnetic line. So this is the core temperature, the core energetic. So the core means the magnetic flux. So right here, when the eclipse went to maximum, at this point, by measurement, the magnetic line went, oh shit, I'm out of here. I mean, the magnetic line collapses. So by measurement, any decent geobiologist worth their salt will tell you that the magnetic lines of the Earth collapse during solar eclipses. And you can read about this here at goldenmean.info/geobiology. I'm going to stop this share. And I'm going to tell you another story. So Vincent Bridges had famously installed a huge stone circle labyrinth array in his backyard in North Carolina. It was North Carolina, I think. And it was Southern North Carolina. And he said, yes, and when I put this center stone in here, the thunder claps and the lightning goes and the rain comes. He says, but the time when I need to install the keystone in the center is just like changing the plumbing in your house. You must wait until the water pressure goes down. When does the water pressure go down? Oh, yeah. When the eclipse happens, the magnetic pressure in the plumbing goes to zero, and then you can install new plumbing. In this case, the new plumbing was major stones in the stone circle, put in the keystone, clunk, and then the magnetic pressure returns like water, and now you have new plumbing. And the best time to do that was the eclipse. So the point is that the reason the magnetic lines of the Earth largely collapse during the eclipse is very, very simple physics. Oh, the moon got in the way. Terrible dielectric. So the focused longitudinal coherence of the sun is obstructed. And so, oh, the seeds don't grow. Oh, the magnetic lines collapse. And guess what? The magnetic lines are the stuff of ancestor memory. The magnetic lines are the river of the collective unconscious. That magnetic grid is the stuff of ancestor memory. That magnetic grid is literally what you inhabit when you dream and when you die, relevant to our conversation with Jenny just now. So this is the plumbing which you ride during the dreaming. Now, when the magnetic grid collapses, what do you need to do? The indigenous people are telling us, you need to hold space. In other words, the array of ancestral memory is at risk. In other words, there is a much higher probability of parasites, because one thing that toasts the parasites, astral and stomach and all kinds of parasites, whatever toasts a parasite is implosion. If you got good implosion, fire in the middle, it toasts the parasites. But when is the implosion reduced? During the eclipse. See, the physics here is, and this is the very profound connection to gravity waves, which is 2 lectures of mine down the road here at fractalu.com, is, the Sufis are saying you must track your attention through the center of your heart, through the center of your feet, through the center of the earth, through the center of the sun. And you track your attention exactly like you were tracking a center of gravity. Well, what is a center of gravity? A center of gravity is where the charge can implode, non-destructively called PlanckFire.com, which is literally somebody pulls the plug down the drain hole called Planck and allows the charge to implode. And that progression down that vortex through the Planck center point, out of that squirt comes the longitudinal wave called gravity. What is the relationship to gravity here? It's everything. So the gravity is the experience of the charge accelerating toward the center of the drain hole being Planck. Out of that squirt comes the longitudinal interferometry. So if somebody obstructed the path down the vortex, what's obstructing the path down the vortex? The damn moon got in the way. So the grid collapsed. So the ancestral memory collapse. So what's the physics here? The physics is that the plumbing, and I mean literally the superfluid magnetic plumbing we call the Earth grid, which is obviously the skeleton of ancestral memory and the collective unconscious, and what makes seeds grow, because that's where it is centripetal. So once you understand a little bit of physics about why you must avoid the moon to have a seed grow, you can begin to think about the dynamics of the eclipse. So, it also, in terms of astral hygiene 101, you know, like, I don't think the full moon or the eclipse is a time to run around and do dances. Hell no. No, I think it's a good time to duck, actually. And by that, I mean something very specific. I mean, well, yeah, you're going to have more parasites wandering around in the array because there's less implosion. And yes, the array is going to be less stable because there's less implosion. So yes, you're going to need to hold your space, but I recommend Astral Hygiene 101 during that period. And yes, if ever there was a time when massive social structures might fall apart, hello, the collective unconscious, the collective emotion is the stuff of that longitudinal array, literally the stuff of our lucid dream, which is sometimes named the body politic. Politics, biologically meaning electrically the body polis, which is the collective plasma of collective bliss. And if you have collective bliss, then you as a pod are navigable. So the definition of politics biologically is the amount of collective bliss that makes your pod navigable. By the way, replacing all need for government. Hello, oops, I didn't mean to say it. Am I a revolutionary? I might be a revolutionary, yes. However, I'm also a biologist, and I know that when a group is able to lucid dream collectively because their collective bliss becomes navigable, the biologic definition of the term body polis and politics. So if you ain't got collective bliss, hell no, you ain't navigable. And why is it that collective bliss process is illegal in almost every country on the planet? Because it replaces the need for governments. And the governments don't like that too much, do they? Is this a revolutionary thought? Yes. But actually, if you don't got collective bliss, you also don't have an immune system. Oops. Oh, and if you don't have collective bliss, you also don't have a soul. Oops. So yeah, we might need to redefine politics now that we know the biologic meaning of the term. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox again, aren't I? Okay. So this was an introduction to the theme that if you were to study the biophysics of the meaning of the concept eclipse, you might learn something about collective unconscious and Solomon and what holds the grid together. And that is a pure physics, and it has everything to do with the electrical coherence of the measurably plasma coherent, measurable frequency signature of the longitudinal emissions which cause lucid dreaming. We've talked about that many times. So absolutely, this is biophysics, is not subjective, and the ability to project that longitudinal coherence, which is the physics of clairvoyance and the physics of lucid dreaming, and that's measurable, it's not subjective, then hello, then you might know of how to deal with an eclipse, because you actually are dealing with the array of ancestor memory, which has just collapsed because that damn hollow metal bad dielectric moon just plugged up the plumbing.
So then this is what we can link to the increase of crime rates globally, right?
Thank you. Yes. So at eclipses, obviously the nut houses fill up, and even at full moon, the nut houses fill up and the crime rate goes up. Well, did anybody ever explain the physics to you? The physics is that longitudinal array is the stuff of the collective dream. It's the stuff of the lucid dream. It's the stuff of ancestral memory. It is the material of the superfluid of that array on which the collective dream propagates. So understanding that the Earth grid, the dodecaecosa Earth grid, suddenly the whole damn magnetic dodecaecosa Earth grid pops like a soap bubble. Of course, there's going to be a few little messes, wouldn't you think? All right. Well, was that a happily ever after? So now we can talk about the evening's conversation. Thank you for bringing that up, though, too, Fun. That's good. So obviously, the term lunatic has just been redefined thanks to me.
Can I say add something to that, Dan, which
Sure,
is
please do. Yes.
Probably the best thing to do is to, if you are going out holding space during eclipse time, is to actually catch the ocean waves, and move into the oceanscape, and into the very long waves, obviously, that cetaceans hold as well, and that the ocean itself. I mean, we live on an ocean planet. So the best thing to do is to immerse yourself and become coherent with the oceans,
Yes.
and ride those long waves.
Beautiful. Yeah. And if you have access to good bodies of water, living bodies of water, that is the ticket. Thank you, Jenny. Perfect. Yes, well said. And so there is supposed to be a gentle and smooth transition into our topic for the evening, which is the science of implosion, the science of vorticity, and the imploder.com, the history, the science, how it works, and how to use it. And we were just discussing the implosive vortex of charge coming from the sun to the earth. And if something messes up that vortex, it ain't quite so pretty. And so now this is our moment where we generalize. What we want to generalize tonight specifically is, what is the quality of a vortex? Whether it's water, whether it's piezo, whether it's magnetic, whether it's the negative ion, the longitudinal wave from the sun, whatever kind of vortex it is, it's all made of charge anyway. But what is the quality? What is the geometry of a vortex in which it is possible to gain energy during charge collapse, named implosion? It is my strong and radical scientific view that the ability to gain energy during charge collapse, called implosion, which I have also named plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, plankfire.com, I have named that ability to gain energy during charge collapse, named implosion. It is my strong conviction that that ability to gain energy during charge collapse is the reason gravity exists. It's the reason seed germinates and life exists. And it's the reason consciousness exists. So, hello, if you don't know how to gain energy during charge collapse, then obviously you ain't going to know why objects fall to the ground. And you ain't going to know how to take consciousness through death. But by the way, it's a vortex. So I think it behooves our scientific community to learn how to gain energy during charge collapse. And they might actually learn why objects fall to the ground and why life exists and why consciousness exists. I sound like I'm on a soapbox again, don't I? Well, I get enthused. All right. So I wanted to show you in that context the graphical history of my discovery of the imploder.com. So that is the pretext for the next set of visuals. First, we start with what I was thinking about at the time when I invented the imploder.com. Share screen, share visual. This is a visual of a seven-fold flow form. Let's see. And I understand that you're not hearing this. So what's happening? This is the seven-fold flow form from the classic Steiner tradition. And the beat rate of those dishes of the flow form, the relative beat rate, the speed of the beat is golden ratio between each beat, with the shorter dishes beating faster. So the beat rate is golden ratio, and the size of the dishes is golden ratio. And then if we go to the... Now here you see it's like a heartbeat, right? Opposing vortex. So now I'm going to stop this screen share. The point I want to make here, stop share, here we go, is that I had one of those seven-fold flow forms installed at the spa at my farm, Crystal Hill Farm in Western New York. It's about 40 years ago now. I was young then. And I was meditating on the fact that it had been proven that that golden ratio nest of vortices was affecting seed germination and life force in water. I thought, oh, well, we need to pressurize that and compress that principle. So I was meditating on how to compress that principle of golden ratio flow form in water when I decided to do this. Now, this is the next series of visuals. This is the series of visuals entitled, what is the history of the development of the flow form? I mean, of the imploder.com. And I'm going to go here to super imploder magnet. Here we go. Okay, you should be seeing a vortex there, right? So basically, I was meditating here on there must be a perfect vortex, a perfect spiral in which perfect implosion was possible. And I knew even then that the solution was golden mean ratio. We knew that even then, but it was only 20 years later that I actually wrote the equation to prove in generalized wave dynamics that golden ratio is the solution to constructive wave compression in general, because it is the solution to recursive adding and multiplying in wave mechanics. So this is me. Here's me sitting there thinking, oh, I need to build me a perfect nozzle. And this is me actually. At that time I had computer software called Super 3D, and I had learned to take a golden mean spiral and put it on a cone in order to nest the dodecahedron. And how I learned to do that, I will tell you now. It's from when I animated, of course, the origin of the Hebrew alphabet. And what I did was I took the XY of a flat two-dimensional golden spiral, like these spirals here, and I set the radius. So in the equation, in the Excel spreadsheet that I used to do the computer animations, I said, oh, I will set the X and Y coordinates to calculate a radius on every point in the spiral. And then that radius on every point of the spiral, I will multiply by a particular magic number called the golden mean, 1.618. And that will then set the z-axis, XY, z-axis for that spiral. And magically, what popped out is right here. The X, Y, and Z coordinate in golden ratio. The Z coordinate puts that spiral on this 60-degree light cone, which it just turns out happens to nest concentric dodecahedron, which, by the way, later became the animation for not just the Hebrew alphabet, but the origin of the Holy Grail. So the summary is that's when I began doing all the computer animations of the origin of the alphabet and the Grail and all the fun stuff. So the summary is here that when the waves converge by golden ratio recursively constructively, not only do the wave lengths add and multiply recursively constructively, but also do the phase velocities, which is to say the wave speed. And because only golden ratio allows that recursive constructive interference, recursive constructive adding and multiplying, that golden ratio nesting permits the adding and multiplying of phase velocities. And so now there's a component of the inertia of those waves, which is experiencing acceleration of phase velocity by golden ratio at each node. And that component of acceleration only experienced by golden ratio. So now if compression occurs in golden ratio only, then there will be constructive acceleration towards center. And the name of that acceleration of charge towards center, initiated by golden ratio, is sometimes called the gravity, which is only a name for the acceleration of charge experienced because of fractal golden ratio. And then this is the answer to the question of what form of compression produces acceleration towards center. And if you knew what produces acceleration towards center, then after you knew what produced acceleration towards center, sometimes called implosion. Then you could learn, after you learned that, then you could learn why objects fall to the ground, and you could learn why life exists, and you could learn why consciousness exists. So if you don't know what causes acceleration from compression towards center, then you can't know why objects fall to the ground or why life exists or why like consciousness. Because consciousness is a plasma vortex that becomes centripetal electrically, measurably, because of that implosion, as proven by Golden ratio and brainwaves. So here's the 3D animation, the 3D visuals of the nesting donuts converging and imploding. It's sometimes called non-destructive self-reentry, which is well known to be a definition of consciousness. So the next thing we want to learn is, what is the angle of that vortex? What is the angle of that vortex which will optimize electrically the phenomenon of not only the production of acceleration of charge towards center from simply compression towards center? What angle optimizes that acceleration towards center? Well, not only are we producing this, we're producing this acceleration towards center, we're producing gravity. And by the way, we have made a piezoelectric vortex like this. So what Schauberger found was that if you take rather pure and charged water, and then you add piezo rock powder, like a quartz powder or a calcite. So that now that vortex is highly piezo, which, by the way, is very wonderful for the imploder.com as well, if the water vortex is mineral, hard, and piezo. Now, what Jonathan and Dolly did in Implosion Research Lab there in UK, they put a 50,000 RPM flat impeller at the bottom. And then if you measure the voltage difference between here, the narrowest part, to here, the widest part, voltage, remember, is simply a name for a difference in electrical pressure, nothing else. And the difference in electrical pressure, Tesla's name was tension, is called voltage. And by measuring that voltage between the narrowest point and widest point, he discovered that, well, actually, Schauberger discovered that he was making power from gravity so well that Hitler wrote a check. Now, the reason that this device makes power from gravity is because in that acceleration process down towards center, if the alignment of that cone is perfected, then the transverse wave inertia is realigned and focused at the throat of the pine cone, Planck, and converted into longitudinal plasma projection, which is the stuff gravity waves are made of, if you happen to believe Tom Bearden gravitobiology. So now we understand how this is a device to make power from gravity. We now understand how this is a device to make gravity itself, because it squirts out longitudinal coherence at the neck of that vortex. So there's another little section here now. I'm going next to my next film. This slideshow here, we're about to see the rest of this slideshow, is now linked at History of Imploder at theimploder.com, also imploder.net. But the next piece of this we want to go to is a little bit of an update on understanding, as the ad for this lecture showed, an understanding of how the Haunebu, the Nazi bell, flew. How and why did it fly? So obviously, see, this is Schauberger's repulsing here, which is, again, taking highly piezo water and focusing it into an accurate cone. So it's spitting out here, right in blue, spitting out the longitudinal component, which is how it's making gravity, which is obviously the fun stuff. Now, so we have taken literally hoses of water in the spiral, and we did the equations, and we produced a small amount of gravity. If you simply do the wrap factor accurately, you can make gravity with a spiral rounding around a torus. We made a small amount of gravity, but we did, and you can see the tracking of our equations at fractalfield.com/propulsion. So the point we want to make here, and so these are more pictures of the Vimana, the Nazi bell. And now we want to understand more detail than anyone has ever taught on this planet of the physics of why that vortex in the Haunebu Nazi bell made gravity. You all know that now you understand very simply how the electromagnetic drive, the EM drive, works, that the microwave cascade down the trapezoid in the EM drive, if it were optimized by PlanckFire.com, would create that implosive compression in the microwave, thus spitting out implosive coherent longitudinal at the pine cone tip of that array. That's how the EM drive works. It needs obviously to be optimized by my equation. Now, this is the material about the Koski-Frost crystal and crystal propulsion, which is also the story about the Atlantean fire crystal. And that is the subject for next week, which is pyramidwirelesspower.com. So we're going to go into that in great detail and explain exactly how that crystal makes gravity, which is the follow-up conversation. But for today's conversation, which is specifically understanding how and why that vortex made gravity, so your 5-year-old will understand what NASA could not teach you right here. Key facts about the Vimana Haunebu gravity-making mercury or piezo vortex. Remember, the ancients used mercury, not just in the Vimana, they used it in the pyramids massively. What was the function of the mercury in the pyramids? Maybe if we understood that, we could understand the function of the mercury in the Vimana, which became the Haunebu Nazi bell. Well, it turns out that the mercury has two, actually potentially three critical physical qualities. One, of course, it's very high specific gravity. It's heavy stuff. So when you do that translation of vorticity, the translation of gravitational inertia is maximized. But in addition, to optimize the production, and remember, we made some gravity by just using water, small amount, fractal field constant propulsion. But what we did not do was the next step. If in the mercury, which is then has higher specific gravity, to optimize that vortex, they used a fine iron powder made soluble by a very secret wetting agent dopant in the mercury, which was what made that mercury famously red in all the Nazi literature. So that red mercury was because that iron made soluble in the mercury enabled a much higher magnetic flux density. It made it magnetic flux permissive. So not only is that high specific gravity, now it's a river for magnetism. Oh, cool. Now, what else? There's one other little key here that nobody ever told you. Everybody wandering around all the, you got like a dozen Gaia TV episodes about the Haunebu, and not one of them has any clue to the physics at all. But every one of them said, oh, hell, oh, heck, there was an immense amount of radioactivity around there. It could kill you. Well, why was it radioactive? Hello. Well, it turns out that in our study of the Paul Brown nuclear battery, we learned that a very small amount of gamma ray radioactivity could create dramatic quasi-superconductivity in certain metals, liquid metals, like mercury, for example. So if you get low level, and it's even in the literature, the Nazis were trucking their mercury trucks over here to zap it radioactively. Why? Because you got a quasi-superconductive effect in the mercury, in the vortex, by low-level radioactivity. And that quasi-superconductive was critical to increase the flux density of the implosive squeeze down from the transverse to the longitudinal at the tip of the pine cone, which is why it made gravity. So now you can understand a little bit more about how, if you know a little bit about the physics of how vortex works, you can actually be empowered to understand these things. Now, why? I'm going to turn off the slides here for just a minute.
Dan, Elisa asks if the angle is a 60-degree angle.
The dominant angle obviously is a 60-degree angle, which is how you nest a dodecahedron one inside the other. Like this is a 60-degree angle from here to here, dodeca inside dodeca. So yes, that's 60-degree implosion. But now, obviously, also the liquid is going to be approximating the 60-degree cone, but there's a certain curvature there. And that curvature is the calculus of curvature of the quality of grace. I mean, it is the design for implosion. I mean, it is how the water is going to actually translate vorticity optimally, and the water will naturally settle to the right vortex because remember, Schauberger is putzing with his vortex and he waits for it to start. So he's putzing with his spin rate, which is thus then going to adjust the angle of the vortex. And how does he know he's about to get power from gravity? Oh, the vortex starts spontaneously getting colder. Hint, that's called negentropy. Oh, heat removal. So the angle of that vortex is related to 60 degrees, but the angle of vortex is obviously tuned and adjusted by spin rate. And it's just like you're adjusting the therapy for max brightness by frequency signature. So you're adjusting the spin rate of the vortex. And when it spontaneously gets colder, and just like the therapy plasma also does, or plasma fire, the spontaneity gets colder means that, yes, negentropy has started, which means the opposite of heat, origin of not just biologic negentropy, but the origin of all negentropy. And that would be a clue then, for example, when nature lines up the molecules to have a seed ready to germinate. And that's a whole nother conversation. Were there any other fun questions there?
Yeah, while you take a sip from your water, can you say that the curvature of the implosion cone would be due to the manifold of the space-time as in relativity? NZ asks.
Einstein was profoundly confused. Excuse me. I mean, all kinds of contributions, yes, wonderful. However, the basics, no, hell no, no clue to why an object fell to the ground. And so he introduced that profound confusion by saying space-time is bent. Pure crap. No, time is only a name for relative spin rate, nothing else. So yes, if you take a torus and you accelerate it, a portion of the energy of that acceleration will be converted into spin rate, named time. So space-time continuum, pure crap. Bending time-space, pure crap. If you want to think accurately, you must learn that time is only a name for relative spin rate, nothing else. And so relative spin rate is aging. Yes, yes, yes. It's all about measuring relative spin rate. Well, so obviously relative spin rate is what you're adjusting to get the throat of the vortex accurate, which is what I just said. It's relative spin rate. And if you want to call that bending space-time, you're just confusing your grandchildren. So don't bother. Any were there more comments in there?
Another one is how the 76 degrees of pyramids are linked to 60-degree cone.
Yes, so that is a beautiful question and the subject of next week, pyramidwirelesspower.com. But briefly, the 76-degree angle is what allowed the pyramid to connect pi to phi, which is what allows the piezoelectricity of the pyramid to conduct an implosive cascade. Remember, this is next week's conversation. There we are in Sam's Bosnian pyramid measuring 53 hertz, 7.83 hertz, and oh, by the way, 28 kilohertz on the roof. Well, those happen to be exact Golden ratio times Planck, except modulated to precisely the Schumann cascade, which is how the Earth works. Now, that's why the pyramid's called the Hummer. So to enact that pi to phi to make the height phi times pi, you needed a 76-degree. It was because you had to have phi times pi. And that's because the piezoelectricity needs to be implosive. That's because the frequency signature of that pyramid needs to have all its harmonic tensors locked on to the caduceus named PlanckFire.com. And that's when you get charge collapse. And that's when you get a gravity diode, which is what a pyramid is. But that's the subject of next week's conversation. But absolutely, the 76 is what enabled pi to phase lock with pi, phi to phase lock with pi piezoelectrically. And that's the fun stuff, because that harmonic cascade then is the caduceus that can implode, and that's the charge collapse that makes a gravity diode, which is what a pyramid is for. All right, well, we finished.
And he asks, when you say that time is relative spin rate, what exactly would be spinning?
Charge. Any other questions? What we're saying is the universe is comprised of one single contiguous compressible medium behaving like a superfluid, sometimes called ether, which is specifically plus and minus charge, which is compression versus rarefaction of the superfluid of the ether named charge. And when I wrote that the first time, Vincent Bridges insisted I had rewritten the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Well, all I was talking about is how the unified field works. And when charge rotates, it stores the inertia, the only origin and definition of mass, period. You rotate charge, you measure the inertia, that's the only definition and origin of mass. And you rotate charge, and you have a period of rotation, speed of spin, the only definition and origin of time, nothing else. In other words, rotation or spin is the cause and origin and definition of the origin of mass and time, period, in the unified field substance, which is a superfluid named charge. And Nassim and I agree on a lot of this, but of course, I don't think he knows why an object falls to the ground. But the point being that once you know that time is only a name for that relative spin rate, everything falls into place. You learn why aging speeds up. You actually learn why, if you do the alchemy of compressing spin inside your body, sometimes named Kundalini bliss, it eliminates aging. Literally, alchemy is the condensation of that increased spin density. So increased spin density is everything. Increased spin density, which is successful compression, is the evolution of consciousness, is the evolution of computers, is the evolution of alchemy. It's only about increased spin density, which is successful compression, which is why if you can sit in the middle of the lightning bolt, sometimes called Danyan Brinkley, sometimes called Kundalini, sometimes called near-death experience, sometimes called the art of resurrection. It's all about surviving the center of a lightning bolt. And if you can, then you can talk fast like me. No, so.
And can you extend that to coincidence as well?
Well, yes. Oh, thank you, Too Fun. You're asking all the fun questions, which is fun. No, yes. So we're defining at goldenmean.info/coincidence that the possibility of coincidence is only and always about the ability of axes of rotation to become superposed constructively, in which case there will be the opportunity to exchange charge coherently, named coincidence. So remember, in the Mayan calendar, when they saw the date history was a golden mean spiral, and that's all at goldenmean.info/coincidence. What they're saying was that the possibility of connections in time is only about the possibility of superposed rotations, which is only the only way you can exchange charge constructively between the short wave and the long wave, which happens to be the reason why golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. Hint, smoking gun, Mr. Physicist who can't figure out why objects fall to the ground. Study why golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, like Kepler's nest of platonics, and you might even figure out why objects fall to the ground. And then you can explain to your 5-year-old. Okay, so the physics of coincidence is the capacitive coupling of charge due to fractal superposition of spin.
Thank you, Dan. And another question, if mass and speed is originated from charge spin, then from where the charge originates?
So there we were. We said the universe is comprised of one single compressible media superfluid named charge, sometimes called ether. And now you just asked me, where did that come from? Well, let me see. There ain't nothing that ain't that. So if you believe in a unified field, which is the religion of Einstein and Moses and Jesus, then you have to agree. And if there's a unified field, then I don't think fish can ask the question where water came from, because no, the existence of a unified field is primal to not being schizophrenic. The moment you begin to doubt that there's a unified field, then you might think that gravity is made of different stuff than electromagnetism. And I say that is a profound, fatal schizophrenia. Any physicist who thinks that gravity is made of different stuff than electromagnetism has a fatal schizophrenia and should be hospitalized. That's my humble opinion. And so, but once you agree there is a unified field, which is like, Moses, Einstein, monotheism, whatever, then you have to say it's all made of the same substance. So can you name that substance? Hell no, because it's everything. You could call it ether, you could call it charge, you could call it a billion things. It don't matter what you name it, but it is unified. It's everywhere, and there ain't nothing that ain't that. Where did it come from? Good question.
Hey, Dan, may I share my super imploder?
Oh, sure. Please do. Please do. I'm talking too much anyway. I'm going to remove the pin here.
So I have a dome set up for growing microgreens, and I just want to share. This is the setup that I have that I leave running 24/7. It's a 6-gallon per minute pump, and it pumps the water, takes from the tank. It goes through the tri-imploder.
Oh yeah, the Vortex. Nice.
And then it goes through the super imploder,
which is magnetics.
There's all magnetics in there.
Oh yeah. Wow.
And then it feeds into the tank. And so I leave this on all the time. And again, this dome is set up for growing microgreens. So this is my water supply for my microgreens I grow.
All right. Wow.
Now, I had a question about what you were talking about. And my question is, if the super imploder were silver or gold plated on the inside and water were forced through, maybe with even a faster pump, could we pull electricity from that? Would that be possible?
It's a beautiful and absolutely fun question. Thank you for being there. Aircrete Harry is a noble and dedicated imploder partner, and he's having fun with the toys, and that's great. And you asked the beautiful question, and your question is so much fun that I'm going to share a screen to do the answer, actually, which is to introduce the biodynamic imploder, which is an example of your question. So if I went to Firefox here, share screen, and then I go to biodynamic shrimp. Okay, and here, this is an example of the biodynamic triploder, which we did market for a while, but because mass production was limited, Laurent, our genius biodynamic scientist, and I can't give away all his secrets actually on how this works, but I can tell you when you do this properly, he has definitely documented the elimination of all need for antibiotics and vaccines in animal farming, and all need for sprays and poisons in grape farming and other things. And he's actually demonstrated in my swimming pool the elimination of the need for chlorine in swimming pool maintenance, all with this principle. So what is that principle? Well, he puts custom biodynamic charge in the inside center of the Vortex nozzle. And again, I can't give away all his secrets, and I don't know all his secrets, and that's a good thing. But I can tell you it involves, in the inside center of the inside nozzle, a layer of thin film gold. And I can also tell you that above that, you can place, and this is the skill of a biodynamic scientist, highly charged potentized biodynamic preparations. And then I can tell you above that, there's a possibility of using a super dielectric of the correct type of beeswax, which is a super dielectric. And what you now have is highly biodynamically charged material in the inside of the center vortex cone. Now then, if the water pressure is great enough, and you do need higher pressure. In fact, I'm going to play you a film of the high pressure right here. I wonder if we can do that. Here we go. I don't know if you probably can't hear it, but you can see it. Okay, here's some of these high pressures.
Oh, yeah.
So the very high pressures. And here, we're actually seeing the effect. So what what Lauren has proven with this technique, now I'm going to stop this screen share, stop screen share. So what's been proven is that in the inside center of the inside cone, near where the implosion is happening, is where it is ideal to have biodynamic preparations and superdielectrics like beeswax and thin film gold. Now, obviously, if the inside of the imploder nozzle had some thin film gold, that would be fabulous too. There are some limitations there, like, you know, how do you bake a thin film gold on certain ceramics? And in the stainless version, it's even more complicated. So certainly, if there was a way to get some thin film gold involved, absolutely yes, wonderful. And the fact is that that is implosive and profoundly useful and really at the heart of all biodynamic preparations. So,
well, that's perfect because that goes right to what my next question. Now, you mentioned the gold. I just started the process of making liquid gold. The purpose is for electroplating. So I think electroplating is the perfect solution for the stainless steel version because it's so conductive already. And you could easily electroplate whatever thickness layer of gold you wanted. And that's my purpose of making it. I just bought the acids to break down the molecules of gold to turn it to liquid. So one of my other questions to you is when you were showing the mercury in the Vimanas, could the mercury be replaced with liquid gold?
under certain circumstances, yes. The gold is probably close in specific gravity, and the gold would obviously support high flux densities. Back to the coating of the nozzle, I know that we did some experiments with ceramic baking of gold paint on certain ceramics when we made those ceramic eggs for measuring life force. And obviously a gold thin film coating on any of these nozzle in the imploder line, either the black ceramic that we use for the smaller imploder nozzles or the stainless. And I'd invite you to chat with Jason about that. By the way, Jason Matozo, fractalwater.com, was scheduled to be with us tonight, but unfortunately he apologized that, in fact, family requirements on Easter, it just got too complicated. So we're sorry about that. But I think Jason would enjoy that conversation with you also. I know there were some issues about deliveries there. But anyway, your study of the gold material is highly appropriate. Remember, the reason a thin film of gold is so powerful and useful to water treatment is because it's radiating a phase conjugate atomic symmetry electrically into the water. That's why also that will be more powerful if not only is the gold thin film, but the water that's passing over the gold is also thin film, as is called epitaxial effect, which Pat Flanagan specialized in. So there's a lot of things that can be done there. And Aircrete, you're the guy to do it. You're a hero. It's all good.
Yeah, I look forward to updating you guys with my experiments. Like I mentioned, I just started the process of making gold plating solution, which is taking pure 24 karat gold and dissolving it in acid into a liquid form. And so now I've got some liquid gold that I'm going to begin playing with. But I have one last question for you, Dan. I just learned about the Roman dodecahedrons. And what I learned, and I got this information from David Wilcock, is that these may have been used to channel energy to maybe like shoot a beam of light or something, or to create a plasma ball. And so basically, Wilcock's research was saying many Romans carried these things all the time. And they were about, I think he said 4 inches or so in size. And so I wanted to get your opinion if you felt that may have been used for that. Even now, I'm putting my hands up. I could feel the energy. So I'm curious if I did use one of these devices, if that would amplify, and what your opinion is on it.
Excellent and fascinating and useful question for sure. So I think they were called, what were they called? The Platonics. What was the name for those? But the dodecahedron with the spheres at the vertex, originally, I was convinced their original function was for mapping the Earth grid magnetic lines you could use that to make a model of the magnetic lines of the planet and thus navigate better. But in addition, I'm sure you are also correct that they could be used to implosively conjugate and compress not just the capacitance, but under the right circumstances, also the microwave. And in that regard, I would mention Elena Danan's recent film about Enki being both Thoth, Isis, Osiris rather, and who's the ancient Vedic god. Anyway, that what Enki is and the Anunnaki, they're always carrying these pine cones, and they're pointing the pine cones and using that to do etheric surgery, actually. Now, what I don't think, there's a couple things that Elena missed. I think Elena's history work is great there, but there are some important things she missed. One is that what she calls the man purse, that famous purse that all of the Anunnaki are carrying, actually, and she showed correctly that is a very thin purse. And the very word purse comes from Urs, meaning Draco bloodline and Stargate. But anyway, the purse was a device to carry the Sumerian Anunnaki computer disk called ME, the Me stones, from which we get the word measurement, Me, Asa, Uru. You take the ME, the Sumerian computer disk, and the Asa, the queen of Ur, makes a measurement, Me, Asa, Uru, and that actually was their most valuable possession was actually the computer disks. And Sitchin did get a few things right, and one thing I think the ME stone definition. So now we know what the purse was for. But what the pine cones they were using, and I don't think Elena quite figured this out, was that it's classic, even the statuary at Rennes-le-Chateau, that the gold powder was served in pine cone shaped cake, actually. They were literally eating pine cone shaped cakes made of gold powder. Well, the reason they were doing that was because concentrated gold nano becomes a super dielectric. And a super dielectric is then a lens for the implosion of the plasma projection of the human aura, which is what those focused pine cones were doing, literally etheric surgery. For example, when Marcel Vogel needed to affect a plant leaf surface on the polygraph using a quartz crystal, he could have done it far better with one of those gold powder pine cones. Point being that this was classic Anunnaki tool because remember, Thoth was the alchemy teacher for Enki, Osiris, and being an alchemy teacher, he would know very well that if you wanted immortality, you had to cook up that kind of alchemy in the gold nanomaterials, which were served in pine cone shaped like cake, which is the original, what the manna from the Bible was, and the origin of Holy Communion. So thank you for fun questions there, Eric Reed. You're having so much fun. So there was a little more to the slideshow there, but before we do, were there any other fun questions there, Tufan? How are we doing?
Scott asks if you know of anyone currently using iron-doped mercury accelerators.
There was a guy named Witkowski from Poland who was trying to understand the mercury vortex. And I don't think they were even close to figuring out the physics. They didn't even know that Vril was just a bad name for projected directional longitudinal EMF. Calling it Vril indicates a kind of lack of understanding of the generalized principle, I think. So no, I don't think, well, we had one team that was able to do this on a small scale, but that's a long and complicated story. But you can make an amazing amount of gravity in a relatively small vortex when you understand the physics. Now why would, here, this is the point I wanted to make at the end of the last little shtick about this. Why am I sitting here trying to tell you how a mercury vortex works? Is that what you want to be doing with your kids? Hell no. Is it even fun? No. Is it dangerous? Yes. Is it a threat to national security? Yes. So then why the hell am I sitting here telling you about the physics of a mercury vortex? Well, there's a very specific reason I'm telling you. And that is because if you would like to take memory through death and learn how to lucid dream, which is how you measure whether you got a soul and will go through death, you damn well need to know how a vortex works, because that's what your consciousness is made of. Remember, we said we said that you already inhabit an array. It's called a nest of fireflies, the synapses in your cortex. That's an array. And when that array makes a compressing vortex indicated by golden ratio, alpha to gamma in your brainwaves, indicating lucid dreaming and bliss, then the vortex becomes implosive in your head, defining the kind of consciousness we call a soul, meaning longitudinal coherent plasma projection, meaning ability to lucid dream, meaning ability to take something through death. So I'm telling you how the Mercury vortex works for one very specific reason. Learn how to make the vortex in your head immortal, and you will be immortal too. And that's called the art of resurrection, in honor of Easter Sunday. 3 days dead. I mean, waking up from a near-death experience. No. So no, don't go out there and play with damn. First of all, poisonous Mercury vortex are a hell of a messy, antique way of making gravity. I mean, yeah, the Nazis did it for a while, and then they got powerful, then they did time travel, and then they became a mess, and then they escaped to Aldebaran when the Federation kicked them out. I mean, it's all a mess. It ain't pretty, but understanding the physics behind how it works is your ticket through death. That's why I'm telling you how it works, because you need to make that vortex in your head sustainable, or else. Like, ooh, what does that mean? It means growing up in metal cities with electrosmog and crappy food is going to mean your kids ain't going to have a soul. That's what it means. It means study how to accrete charge, called the quality of grace, to make your vortex alchemically immortal. And that's why this is worth studying. I'm not telling you to go out there and play with Mercury vortexes. Hell no. Obsolete, crappy, dumb, inefficient, not the best way to make gravity. Now, a little bit more efficient way to make some gravity would be pyramidwirelesspower.com. And that will be next week. And that's what the Koski Frost crystal was about. And that's how we correct Dan Willis's a bit superficial description of how the fire crystal toy stone works. Once we know that the axes of harmonic vibration modes in that crystal need to be superposed on the caduceus defined by plankfire.com, and then you get the harmonics fitting on that cascade. And that ain't never going to happen, Dan Willis, in a crystal with sloping sides. No, it's only a crystal that's actually parallel sides, for reasons we're going to explain next week. So anywho, the point of all these conversations about learning about vortex, learning about gravity propulsion is, it ain't even that much fun. If you wanted to be Beam Me Up Scotty, and you wanted to make your what do they call it? Oh yeah, get your dilithium crystals, getting them warp engines working. Would you like to be Scotty the engineer? Well, actually, no, that's also boring. Learning how a crystal works is for the purpose of learning how your DNA works to make some gravity. And now that's elegant. But, even learning how to make crystal gravity is, well, it could be fun for a few million years, but ultimately it ain't the solution. No, it's the biologic solutions that are sustainable. And those are why we're learning about the physics. Anywho, how are we doing on questions there, Tufan?
We have a few more. Lori says, I get asked often how the ultra implorer can actually remove the iron and algae from the water. I can only say that the water tests show evidence of non-existence, and the only thing it is not removing is the manganese. Any comments on that?
Okay, so that gives me my excuse to show a picture of an ultra imploder, which I think is really useful, fun. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do, here's the ultra imploder right there. So the ultra imploder is solid stainless, virtually bulletproof, and very powerful, obviously. Now, let's see, we'll go to the ultra imploder page to look at a bigger copy of that picture here. So this is what we're talking about. And we have to credit Jason Matozo, fractalwater.com, for helping take the original design I had and implementing it in the larger stainless version. The Ultra Imploder from the imploder.com, imploder.net, or fractalwater.com. And so would you repeat the part of that question about what it did and did not remove one more time, please? Sorry, Tufan, you're muted. Sorry, if you could unmute. Sorry, guys.
Sorry. I can only say that the water tests show evidence of non-existence of iron and algae, I guess. And the only thing it is not removing is the manganese.
Yeah. So what we know is these kinds of devices replicably have been shown, for example, to remove 60 to 90% of the chlorine, for example. Now, when you get spin density, it's like a centrifuge which sorts by atomic mass. So obviously, if the chlorine molecule is so much different in specific gravity, in mass, than the water molecule, then a high-level centrifuge is going to spin out what don't fit. So it's highly intuitive why even the regular super imploder and imploder, they measured 60 to 90% removal of chlorine. In fact, people with just the vortex alone, when it's piezo, the imploder shower, they regularly report that the chlorine smell is gone in the shower.
Lori says it is lake water and not civic water treated.
Aha, yes, yes. So the lake water probably is relatively piezo, meaning hard, meaning some mineral, which means it will be piezo, and that's good for enabling the vortex to work, because that means at the implosive spin point, you get more piezo, more charge, and more implosive capacitance at the nozzle of that vortex. That's good. And the removal of a bacteria, I don't say we're not sterilizing the water, but when you get charge density, if the vortex is at higher pressures and the water is more piezo, you will kill more of the bacteria, because obviously spin density is the definition of the origin of what sorts out the parasites. Basically, it blows them up. Anything implosive removes the parasitic. That's by definition. We can understand. Now, I would just have to guess that magnesium, for example, is more uh, chemically, probably covalently embedded in the water, and the difference in density and specific gravity is not as great. So if we investigated the chemistry, we'd probably find out why the magnesium isn't coming out as easily. And the theory again would be, if you had higher pressure and higher spin density in this vortex, ultimately, as our new work in alchemy is showing, if the vortex is strong enough, you literally transmute alchemically. So when the plasma density of a vortex goes very, very high, you can transmute anything. And we will be talking more about that with our expert on this subject, who is Rob Greenier. But that's in future conversations. Was there another question there, Tufan?
Yes. What do you think about leaving water with a piece of gold overnight and drink it?
Well, this is inappropriate that, the Chinese, they put a little thin film of gold on their cake and they eat the cake, gold and all. That's classic Oriental. They knew. Anything that makes pure gold soluble in blood, I mean, that's the manna from heaven, man. The reason is because it's the ultimate conjugator, and blood needs to be a conjugator, implosive. So yes, if you had very high quality gold and high quality water, and particularly the epitaxial effect, the thin film effect, Pat Flanagan pioneered, or the super energy drops and the crystal energy drops, and he could even use that to control the drying rate of paint, epitaxial water effect. So epitaxial water effect on gold, oh yeah, this could be very powerful. Because remember, the water molecular geometry, the hydrogen in the water, specifically probably the ultimate phase conjugator, is then absolutely embedding and remembering and imprinting the electrical geometry on the thin film of whatever it touches. Absolutely. Which is why water that's been sitting on aluminum is horrible, and water that's been sitting on gold is wonderful.
Ajda says, then you say that consciousness is a vortex, so the
Absolutely.
tiny space of the heart would be the right place to meditate from, as Dranvolo teaches. Is there a physical proof?
I missed the center of that question. The space of the heart. Say that space of the heart.
So you say that the consciousness is a vortex, and so the tiny space of the heart would be the right place to meditate from, as Dranvolo teaches and proposes. Is there physical proof? She asks.
Well, that's the old heart-brain question. Which is more powerful? You know, the reason Heart Math Institute advertised for decades that the heart is 1,000 times more powerful than the brain is because I taught them that the EKG is 5 millivolts and the EEG is 5 microvolts. So hell yeah, the heart is, about 1,000 times more electrically. However, the way the heart entrains the brain, which is the whole physics of Kundalini, it effectively means the following. When people say you think with your heart, what actually they're saying is that you're allowing the centripetal force of the heart as a longer wave, by definition, can then become the center of gravity of the tornado of the brain. So literally, the brain makes a tornado. Absolutely. That's the vortex of living plasma charge that you take with you when you dream and when you die. Absolutely. That's pure physics, and that's longitudinal coherence. Now, what did the heart have to do with making that immortality? The heart generated the low frequencies to enable that tornado to stabilize, which is instructive in the HRV, sacrocranial low frequency harmonics, which are the motor of Kundalini biophysics. goldenmean.info/Kundalini. We made dozens of documentaries on the biophysics of Kundalini. So the heart is setting the stage for the low frequencies to drive the tornado of the brain. But now, if you didn't have a brain, could you think with your heart? The electric plasma field of the heart can be huge and powerful and absolutely the essence of compassion. But it's the brain that actually sets the tornado to become navigable. So the heart is the battery for the long wave that then enables the brain to steer the tornado. So that, you could have a lifetime long conversation on which is more important, the heart or the brain. But the bottom line is both are a recursive donut turning inside out and imploding. And it's the phase lock between the heart and the brain via the sacrocranial harmonics, which are measurably the biophysics of Kundalini. So I'm going to leave it at that.
What about spinning water in a blender before drinking? Elasa asks.
That could be a little tricky. Now, if that blender happened to have a non-fractionating impeller, they used a flat impeller at Implosion Research Lab in Plymouth, UK, Jonathan and Dolly. That was a non-fractionating impeller. And if the geometry of the vortex of that blender happened to have silver or gold thin film on the sides, ooh. And then if the water happened to be super pure, highly charged, and slightly piezo, in the vortex in Jonathan Dolly in Plymouth, UK, that vortex, 50,000 RPM flat impeller, you had a giant ultraviolet blue orb form around that water vortex, and you set that in the middle of a polluted lake, and the lake precipitates almost immediately and turns into pure water. Yeah, implosion vortexes are powerful, but can your average blender do it? Well, I think you got to tweak the design a little bit.
I just put a website on the chat that I enjoy spinning the water in a jar with ceramic and then drink it if anyone is interested.
Beautiful. Yes. And the ceramic is probably a higher dielectric. And if you had a little thin film of gold, and then if the water is a little piezo rock powder in it, beautiful, beautiful.
Also, the Lily impeller.
Yes. Good. Working on a non-fractionating impeller. Cool. Thank you, Aircrete Harry. Yes, magic. And that's, by the way, the shape of the heart muscle. Hint.
So Maura asks, are there locations on the Earth that have lower or higher gravitational pull? For example, the Indian Ocean or Antarctica. Are these areas more susceptible to the lower gravity phenomena during the eclipse? And what is the implication that they turn on the Hadron Collider on the day of the eclipse as well? Does it affect the Earth in any way? If so, how?
Yes, it is well known that the gravity field of the Earth is absolutely not homogeneous. That means that the amount of gravity under your feet is changing all the time, wherever you walk, high gravity, low gravity. Now, a conventional physicists would say the high gravity places are where there's more specific mass under your feet. But that physicist doesn't know that also the dodeca symmetry of the magnetic lines also affect the amount of gravity. And by the way, the amount of gravity is directly related to the amount of attention that's possible, because where the compression lines called longitudinal EMF, which is what gravity is made of, the compression lines of longitudinal EMF, their convergence is exactly where telepathy and bliss are enabled. So amount of gravity and amount of consciousness are intimately and profoundly linked, which is specifically my subject in about a month's time at fractalu.com. So yeah, the gravity field is itself a bloodstream, and the density of the amount of gravity is related to, for example, when Bruce Cathy said that the Earth grid magnetic lines cross points, which do affect gravity density, dramatically affect nuclear critical mass. And we already know those same magnetic line cross points are the places where telepathy is physically possible. Why? Longitudinal interferometry. Hello. Okay, and the last part of that question was about the Hadron Collider, was it? Yes, the last part of that question.
Yeah. So what is the implication that they turn on the Hadron Collider on the day of the eclipse?
So remember, the people who designed the Hadron Collider do not know why objects fall to the ground. They do not know how gravity is stabilized. They do not know what a gravity diode is. Uh, they don't even know why Tesla's high voltage caused earthquakes. So these dummies are not to be trusted. I'm sorry. I don't want to pick on the kids. However, I think they're dumb. And yes, the Earth grid is more susceptible to destabilizing during an eclipse. That is a physics I have just articulated in detail. And these damn dummies who turn on these high voltage devices at the wrong time kind of gives you a hint that they might not be the good guys. End of comment.
All right. Do you think there is a chance to activate those global pyramid system again? Ajda asks.
Activate those global what system?
Global pyramid system.
Oh, the global pyramid system. Well, please ask me that question next week when my subject is pyramidwirelesspower.com. But specifically, remember, their Tesla is out on his lawn with the wrong frequency signature and not knowing where the longitudinal nodes are, trying to pick up global wireless power and failing. Got the wrong frequency signature, got the nodal pickup points wrong. So obviously Tesla didn't figure it out. I'm not picking on the guy. He made wonderful contributions, but it's just a few things he didn't quite get, like the physics of gravity. So if we're ever going to get global wireless power, you know, here's my reply to that question. Once we are aware that we could make the frequency signature of our power transformers to be precisely phase conjugate. For example, in Europe with 50 hertz, you can make carbon nano. And in the USA with the stupid Tesla 60 hertz, you absolutely cannot make carbon nano. Hello, USA, you got a problem. And so now, if you made your public utility grid precisely Schumann phase conjugate, suddenly all of your transformers plasma field would begin to become self-aware. Oh, Meditate on that as your next science fiction novel, would you? So yes, we could eventually restore the global wireless power, but then it would be a mind. Is that fun or is that scary? Think about it.
A follow-up question to that. So if magnetic lines cross and in coherence with them, one would measure heavy body mass. Doesn't the gravity age us?
Well, aging is a name for the destabilizing of spin rate. So if you can have intense bliss, which is the alchemy, which effectively is how Enki and Anu both literally got immortal when their alchemy teacher, Thoth Hermes Ningishita, taught them. So immortality is literally the physics of alchemy. Absolutely, that is spin density. And well, does that mean the gravity grid ages us? Well, let's put it this way. The primary complaint of the arriving Anunnaki Nephilim arriving at Earth was, we're aging catastrophically. We're going to need to build a Shem unto the Lord, which is literally a black hole device to eliminate aging. Step number one. And what did it look like? The plasma tube on the pyramid wall, now called Therify.net. It was called negentropy. So we have to build anti-aging technology. Later in the Bible, the Shem unto the Lord, which is what that was mistranslated as an altar in a church. Well, the altar in a church actually is a capacitor designed to eliminate aging, if you understand the physics. So I think gravity does not have to age us. But remember, Harkonnen required suspensors, because otherwise, if he didn't have an artificial electric field, he would die immediately. So electric fields are what keep us alive, and gravity is part of that array. And if that array is not fractal or conjugate, yes, it's going to be premature aging. But the Anunnaki complaining about premature aging kind of betrays one of their other little problems was, we're not going to give that gold powder to these humans. They might become immortal too. Oh, shit.
So another follow-up question to the previous one about the lower or higher gravitational pull effects. Maura asks, so should we focus our attention on the lower gravity areas of the planet during the eclipse?
The lower gravity would mean that there is less implosive symmetry underneath you. However, lower gravity by itself does not indicate charge distribution efficiency. Consciousness is charge distribution efficiency by definition, which is really what alchemy accomplishes. So what's been called sacred space, where magnetic lines cross in a fractal, dodecikosa, for example, those enable charge distribution, sometimes called heaven or planes of Charon. So those are the place where telepathy and bliss are enabled, and those are important. High gravity and low gravity by themselves ain't enough, is not the ultimate solution. Low gravity means, yes, there's less mass under you, but it does not mean the magnetic lines are fractal enough to support sacred space. So measuring for higher and lower gravity, for example, when you go over a volcano, the top, frequently they measure the destability of that tornado because it has lower gravity. Why? The mass underneath has less symmetry, which means less stability. Is that a good place to meditate? Well, if you had bliss there, you could help hold the earth together, but it's going to be harder to have bliss where the magnetic lines are not fractal. So yes, you serve your environment by creating bliss because you make that implosion, like Francis of Assisi, they called the fire department when he sat in the forest having bliss. So you make the stuff which holds your environment together when you have bliss. However, that would be harder to do if you start at a spot which is less than fractal.
Last question. Can you elaborate about the evolution of computers in relation to this talk? Oscar asks.
Well, if I may be allowed to step back up onto my soapbox for a moment, I think we need to scream at the kids that ain't never any damn computer is going to become self-aware because the plasma inside cannot implode. Hello, it ain't alive. Now, it don't mean that AI is not wonderfully useful, but as long as the kids think that's ultimate evolution and do not understand the physics of soul, those same kids are going to be losing their soul. So tell your damn kids that AI is not the ultimate form of evolution in any damn metal computer. No, the ultimate form of evolution is when bliss happens sitting in a forest where charge compression is optimized. And that is never, ever going to be in some goddamn metal machine. Okay, that was I'm getting off my soapbox now. But you got all these kids thinking, oh, romantic, oh, what we need is AI. AI is going to make us immortal. No, until you know what a soul is, AI is more problem than solution. Okay, I'm stepping off the soapbox now. Was that a happily ever after?
Thank you, Dan.
Okay. We had some fun today, kids. I hope I didn't get carried away.
All good.
Blessings. Thank you for joining us. We had some fun. Thank you for your beautiful questions. Thank you for caring. Remember,
so next week we are talking about Pyramid wireless power.
Pyramid wireless power. So we're going to finish this stage 2 of this conversation is next week about the ultimate crystal device. Yes, the fire crystal. Thank you. Thank you. Blessings.
See
Carry
you all next
feeling
week.
like you would a little child, said the Soupy.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys.
Good
We had fun.
evening.
Blessings. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Aircrete. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.